Johann in Law podcast. You get the information you need in terms you can understand and act upon.
Hey everyone, this is Johann in Law podcast number 5, and I'm here with Mike Grossman, the founder of Goofy Froot, and he's a Tulane University alumni. And great to have you, Mike. And we're going to hear all about how you got Goofy Froot off the ground and all the things you've learned along the way.
It's great to be here, Adam. Thanks for having me.
So, what is Goofy Froot? And how did it start?
Okay, so Goofy Froot at its heart is a comic book series that I created with my friend Max. I'm the writer primarily, and he's the artist primarily. And we created this back in 2015. So we've been working on this for nearly a decade. And as we were making our comics, we also really thought of it as a brand and as an intellectual property, which has led us to also create, a range of a product line and, a lot of things that you don't see IP doing too much like later on. So something that gets big. We've been doing it from the beginning and doing it in a way with the idea that people will want to read the content and then be fans of the characters and, buy merchandise as well.
Okay, so you have a comic book series going, but you're making money in ways other than selling physical comic books.
Yes, that's kind of like the core of the content is having comics, but along the way to earn additional money, whether we're making this t-shirts or something like enamel pins, we also it's really like when you think about merchandise, there's a range of something from like, is this just swag or something we're creating, or is this more of like an actual product and a product line? And along the way, we've kind of just been inching towards, I created a couple items as promotion to, okay, this is actually a product line, which kind of exists almost as a separate business, but it's tied to what we're creating in the content.
Right. So in some sense, it's like you see a lot of merchandise that has a logo or it has a certain symbol that's supposed to mean something in theory, but you're actually creating that meaning by having whole stories behind things that are on people's clothing.
So basically, I'm out in the world and you see people wearing apparel, whether it's t-shirts, hats, bags that have popular characters. We have Goku, we have SpongeBob. These are all major, super popular characters created by animation studios, and they have, their big manufacturing licensing departments, and they could create, this high level of merchandise, and people like it because they're fans of these characters. And I just said, well, there's no reason why what I'm doing is any different just because we're just starting out and much smaller. Our characters can compete with these other characters, and there's no reason that we shouldn't create the best products that we can.
You had that mindset basically from day one, even before the comic books became a thing in and of themselves. You were already gearing it to be this multi-pronged business.
I think it happened pretty early so the whole idea of Goofy Froot almost happened by mistake. We could back up a little bit. So Max and I, we were really good friends, and we had the idea to create comics together starting back in 2011. And this was right after I had finished school. I went to Tulane, as you mentioned, and he went to Loyola, which is right next door. But we had become roommates at that time. And so, lots of hanging out then. And, we were in New Orleans. We were both working the service industry. So lots of downtime to commiserate, think of creative ideas. And that's where, pursuing comics became something that we both shared, and me, being on the writing side and him being on the art side. So we started pursuing some ideas. And it wasn't until about 4 years later that Goofy Froot came about as an idea, almost accidentally. Initially, it was just a character series of sketches, drawings that Max was doing as a warm-up while we were working on another idea. But we really liked the characters, and then we turned them into a more finished art print. And then we printed that, as digital prints onto cardstock and sold them at a show that was local New Orleans. So at that point, when we started to sell them, we realized that, we weren't even thinking of it as a comic just then. It's just that, okay, we have this, print series of characters. It's interesting. And people like specific characters for their look, their name, their personality. The idea of really doing more merchandise was very early on, but it took a little bit longer for me to really be like, yes, this makes a lot of sense. I had to see it out there in the market a bit, and that just step by step pushed me to move it forward. And as we did more characters, more content leading into the comics, it kind of had all happened, from the beginning. At the same time.
Got it. So when was the first time that you realized that there was going to be more to the brand than just comic books? Like what was your first big collaboration with another entity that gave you something in the production process that you couldn't have provided yourself?
Well, I'd say early on, like we were producing stickers, and then I would say when we created our first enamel pin is when we had to start, going to a factory. At this point, we were working with someone who's kind of, a middleman. It's before I understood how to really communicate with factories and really be deep into product design and manufacturing process. Fortunately, there was someone that we could kind of lean on, even just really thinking as artists and designers. But getting into the product of enamel pin, which is something that is more physicality to it than, let's just say, a sticker, which is really easy to get through a print on demand, or even a T-shirt. An enamel pin were really popular at the time, but it took us to have a little bit more thinking around that product. And then really, like, in this early days, I would say there wasn't a lot of organized information out there for what we were trying to do, whether that was even to make comics, to make brand, to build the lifestyle character IP, and there's still not a lot. So we kind of fell backwards into that, and a lot of trial and error. And really, like, we were so passionate at that time. It was just like we also became obsessed with pins, in the culture around them, collectability, the creation. So we were really like pursuing our own desire to make something cool based on the characters we were doing. And creating comics can take a long time. So we're almost like, I want this comic to exist, and that's going to take a year. But if I order this pin right now, I'll probably have it in 5 or 6 weeks. And that'll kind of satisfy, the desire to, create something and get it out into the world. Because for me, it's like, I don't really just want to write comic scripts and stories and then have them done and put them in a desk drawer. Like, I want them to be published. I want them to be in places where you could find them, read them, collect them. For me, like, the distribution of the work is almost as important as creating the work itself. Because if no one's ever going to see it, then what was the point of creating it?
So before we get into the distribution, how you got that off the ground, one thing I'm curious about is why you chose to just make the pins yourself. Because what so many people who have valuable IP do is they just collaborate with, say, like a clothing brand who's already in the business, or a regular tchotchke brand that already makes pins, and just do it through like a licensing partnership or something like that. Like, so much of IP monetization is licensing, but you decided to just get into the sticker and the pin business yourself. Did you have to like deal with manufacturers in like China and stuff? Like, what was that like to navigate the manufacturing world, which is something a lot of people get into, especially in the last 10 years. Like, Amazon has become such a thing. So many random people are manufacturing themselves, and you were doing that very early. That was sort of in the early days of Amazon. How did you learn how to navigate that?
Really just over time, and in the beginning we were working with, US print shops, whether it's for stickers. It wasn't until much more recently, the last couple of years, I just started going everything direct overseas and managing the manufacturing process. I'd say there's, like, in the beginning, I think there's a lot of barriers to working with brands that are more established than you. I think you need to be a little bit established and be able to hold your own in the conversation to even approach any brand. Yet to this day, I still haven't approached like a larger brand for a collaboration. I think that's something that is going to be on my mind over the next couple of years. But it's really to what I'm trying to achieve with these characters is something that is meant to be built slowly over time. The idea of, you could just rush into, a Walmart or a Target and get this mass product distribution, that's actually like the opposite way to think about this, I've learned, because you want to establish, the diehard tribe around the character and where it shows up. And it's much better for this to show up in a very kind of specialty market than anything in the mass market. Even if that could lead to faster money, that's like money that's going to burn out, and you're not really going to become what you want to become. So to really do this business the right way, you have to commit to a very long life cycle and to, like, step by step, year after year. And that's going to lead to like that'll turn you into a Peanuts versus IPs that have flamed out that we can barely even remember because they didn't stick with us. So that's why I would recommend to, like, not even on just like a bigger, if you have a connection, you can, like, we could do a collab, with Nike or something like that. I would probably to caution against doing that, even in like the first 10 years of your IP, because it's just too soon and it's not really going to make sense.
I think that's fascinating, because so much of what people think of when they think of IP monetization is that. But if you're going to take the road that you've suggested, where you build up your core base first and you sort of go from there and you wait 10 years, one of the consequences of that people are going to need to accept is that they're going to need to have more tools in their tool chest because they're going to have to do the manufacturing themselves if that's how it's going to be. So I also want to talk about the distribution and how you got this initial cult following and really the early days, like going from 0 to 1 with a piece of IP is such a, intimidating thing. Even now, like in the era of social media where things can go viral, but you did it a long time ago. How did you create the initial buzz around the product?
Yeah, so it is very difficult. And I would say, we're still in the early phases. We're still really early. And I think we're moving into that next phase in a major way. And of course, you look at our timeline and life cycle, having COVID happen in 2020, that was a major hiccup. That I feel like in some ways set me back several years, and then I've been playing catch up, and I think I'm gonna maybe in another year or two I'll maybe be where I would have been a little bit faster, and that happened to everyone, so it's okay. But to answer your question and bring it all the way back to the beginning, we built up this audience, well, really one person at a time, doing events in markets. When we were in New Orleans, we were showcasing regularly at night markets. We kind of found a little niche in selling at night markets, and then of course doing comics at Comic Cons. We even did a tour of Comic Cons around the Southeast. We did this before we had an actual printed book. Now I would not probably recommend that, just because we were just young, we were inexperienced, we had nothing to lose, and we just said, let's go for it. And I'm glad that we had that energy. But now looking back a little bit, wiser, more experienced, I'm like, wow, we were nuts for doing it. But in this world, like, you're gonna pay for your tuition, your education, one way or the other. So we just constantly jump into things. It's hard for this to necessarily be a profitable enterprise off the the jump. I'd recommend for this not to be someone's sole income, especially in the early stages before you've really built up successful product lines, you've built up the audience. No one really gets into the world of something like comics or character IP purely to make money. If you just want to make money, there's better ways to do it. But if you're obsessed with characters, obsessed with creation, and you want to create your own things and get your stories out there, I mean, that's a reason to do this and a reason to be here. And if you stay here, yes, you can eventually start to make a full-time living and a lot of money doing it. But if that's what is, getting you into this in the first place, I wouldn't do it, because being at these markets, you're spending a lot of time, a lot of energy. And back then we were making a couple $100s a night, which was good at the time. I'm not even sure, like, you have to be, it's not even about the money, it's about the connection with the audience. But typically we're paying to be there. And then through our life cycle as well, like, social media evolved tremendously. It was almost like every year there was something new to be doing on social media. And now we're almost at this point in the cycle where social media is to some degree unimportant in its own weird way, where it's not providing the distribution that it once was. It's something that you feel like you need, but you're not exactly sure what you should be doing with it. So again, we find ourselves in a position, and this is what my major focus has been for the last year, is really building everything again on my own, as my own platform. So we do host the comics digitally in a few places, but we're really going to be hosting them on our own website first and foremost going forward. So I'm really going to be promoting reading the comics on goofyfroot.com versus, a Webtoon or Tapas or any of these other digital comics apps.
Interesting. So okay, I want to get into the sort of the idea of using those third-party platforms. But first, I want to hear more about what the early ground game was like, just going around to these live events in New Orleans or in the Southeast, because I think the communities in New Orleans are very open-minded to, like, people who just show up to festivals and go to a booth or something. You can definitely get people to hear you out, and there's buyers in those contexts. So who were these initial consumers and the initial cult followers? Was it like local people in New Orleans or Louisiana area?
Yeah, a lot of locals as well as some tourists. I think what we saw over a year being at that market is that it started to cater really heavily towards tourists they were really only interested in that very kind of typical, New Orleans. They wanted a crawfish. They wanted something that felt very like what they were expecting. Like, you come to New York, you want a Statue of Liberty. There's a couple things that are iconic, and we were really very kind of indie. So it's more niche, but we were attracting people. At that time, we were building up an email list, and then we got onto Instagram, and we kind of just used that to almost as a way to just a place for our fans to find us and to stay in touch with updates. But it really was all about just ground game, about meeting people, about networking, about doing small events, supporting other artists, kind of becoming part of that artist community. And one of the things that we had is because we were making comics, but we also had artwork. We were kind of like, straddled between a lot of different niches within the art world. So you have comics, you have collectibles. We've also really gotten into street art and painting the characters either in, graffiti murals or stencils or other kind of things that are, for artists that put their work on the street, including stickers. So that kind of led to this other guerrilla marketing dimension to the brand, which I think has really made sense. And it's just something like, another thing that I personally love it. I love the idea of, having a sticker, putting a character, putting it on a light pole, putting it on the back of a stop sign, putting it at some random place that you're traveling in the world. It's this idea of like, this character is real. This character exists out there in the world just like anything else. And then I've had someone, when I was in New York and setting up in Washington Square Park, I had someone find me and she had seen the sticker. She was in New Orleans the week before and she saw stickers in New Orleans, and then she found me again in New York and she showed me a photo of a sticker that she just took a week ago. And that was like, those experiences don't happen that often, but they do happen. I've been putting up these stickers now for 8 or 9 years, and every time it happens, it's incredibly affirming that people actually are seeing something like a sticker on the street, which there's no way to track data on, but it's out there.
I mean, I've personally had the experience of just being in the neighborhood around my office in Bushwick, and I'll see one of your stickers every now and then. And it's great to see something like that in public. It's much more special than if I just see the sticker that I have in my office or something. It's to see these characters out in the wild. It definitely hits differently. And I think a strategy like that is one of those things that in this modern data-driven world, things that aren't trackable are not super popular in the marketing world. But the whole sticker thing, there's a reason it's always been big in big cities. So I think that's really cool, and I think the stickers are great. So another thing I want to ask about is these third-party platforms for distributing comics. Now, no matter what kind of art someone is making, whether it's literary or visual or otherwise, there's usually some sort of third-party platform or platforms that are in the game, and they play a role in most art forms is what I've realized. So can you tell us a little bit about what are those third-party platforms in the comic world, and what's your perspective on the utility of those and the limits of those?
Yeah, 100%. And just to touch a little bit back on what you said with the stickers. So here's how I think about it, and in the sticker world, it's okay, we could put stickers everywhere, put a sticker on every corner, be ubiquitous, be everywhere. But one thing I really do think about, because you mentioned that everyone likes things that are trackable, and okay, this isn't trackable. But if you're kind of part of this culture, how the culture thinks. And there's also a fan of this culture. And I think about it this way. I'm here, I'm close to you in Bushwick. And then people who go to Bushwick and like street art, well, they probably have been in Miami around Wynwood, which is another street art hub. So if I have some art over in Miami around Wynwood, and then I have art here in Bushwick, I'm probably going to get that same person twice over a period of time because they're part of a culture. And these are places where that culture goes to. They don't all have to be in the same city. It could be scattered throughout the world. And that's a way you could kind of dynamically position yourself to be in the right places. And that, that kind of ties into what you're doing digitally. When you bring up these third-party platforms, something like a comics platform, like Webtoons, the most popular digital comics platform. There's some other ones. There's Tapas, there's Global Comics. These are just a little bit more specialized than Instagram is not really a comics trading platform. It's a general social media. It doesn't really do discovery that well anymore. It's kind of, I think of it like a major street. It's like Times Square. It's everyone is hawking everything at once. And hopefully you get filtered a little bit closer to something you're interested in. On a platform like Webtoons, it's all the same, but everything there is content. So as a smaller creator, it's all about the long tail. So if I find people there, that's great. And I hope they get to enjoy the content. But ultimately, it's a rented audience, just like on social media. So that comes back to why I'm building my own platform on my own website, my own list, because that's the audience that I own. And having members of the audience that I own is probably worth 10 of the audience that's being rented, because attention has been brought down to the lowest fractional amount. And it's just, that's part of why stickers on the street, to tie it all together. If you see 10 of my stickers in a day, that is almost the same as you seeing my, promoted story on Instagram 10 times. That small little piece of content of attention. And hopefully you convert that person, on the street. Really, it's the street and the same as online. check out my account page. So really like my Instagram account is like the tip of the spear. But the hope is that once you're there, you're not done with my funnel. Then I hope you'll get to my website. I hope you'll get on my email list. And all this is like, discovery and before you even become a fan who's bought something. And from my perspective, I don't need anyone to buy anything. I just need you to know about it and be a consistent fan. We'll worry about purchasing something later. It's really just about getting the right people to know about the content and have them see it consistent.
So you're touching on something that I think every business that does digital advertising, which is pretty much every business, thinks about, which is the distinction between the lists that you own and the ones that you rent. And I heard someone recently say that they didn't want to do a LinkedIn newsletter or any other type of like newsletter on a third party platform because they want to not, have an email list where that's the only way to get this blog. So even if you do both, you have your list that you own and you have the third party stuff. If there's not an exclusivity to what you own, then people are not hooked as much on those platforms. So what is it that's so important to you about, having people go through your website or other digital assets that you control as opposed to social media platforms or other platforms that can connect you with people, but not only connect you with people, but keep you re-engaged? Because I hear a lot of people, they love all these third-party platforms for connecting and for meeting with people. The problem is those third-party platforms, they want to keep your relationship with these people on the platform. We want to remove them and bring them, back to our platform where we can operate long term with them.
It's really, just that kind of battle, right? Because there's a platform that has 2 billion users, like Instagram or, however many Facebook has. That's where everyone is. And then you're trying to pull them out of there. Now, I need that platform to exist. I mean, if these major platforms didn't exist, that's a piece of the chain that would be missing. And then it would be really hard to get people to know about me in the way, en masse to a big enough level. So I'm grateful that they exist. I kind of have a lot of anger towards them about how they've treated creators over the last 5 years, where discovery has gotten so low, where basically the audience that you've built up because users have consented following you in hopes of seeing more of your content, that action that the user has taken, saying, yes, I like this person's content, they've kind of devalued that or even thrown that user's action out the window. So even though someone follows me and says, I like this, I want to see more of it, the platform isn't necessarily going to follow through on that and give them that content. And again, there's always maybe this platform decides they don't like my content anymore, or they just don't want me to have an account anymore. Then all this following, all this, this marketing data goes away. It's not accessible to me. But if I can have the direct relationship, then I own all that fan data. I mean, this is kind of the next thing for me that is becoming, really important now that I'm building the platform and I'm about to do a really big marketing push for the next issue by doing a Kickstarter. Is I really want to know as much fan data as possible. Like, I think that's really the secret going forward to being able to run a brand, as a smaller creator. Is I want to know everything about my fan in relation to me and the brand. What character do they like? What books have they bought? How often are they commenting or visiting the website? All these things are really helpful into knowing that are they a super fan or they're a casual fan? Because there's going to be a percentage that are going to be my super fans, and that's what's going to help me survive more than anything. So it really is being able to understand that array and understand when someone's kind of making that jump from a casual fan to a super fan, and not knowing that is just it's going to lead to a lot of inefficiency.
I think you're touching on two reasons why the number of followers that someone has on a third-party platform like social media isn't necessarily valuable. And the first is because, like you said, they can just still remove you from discovery, or they can just stop showing you to those people who followed you, even though they followed you. And the old days of social media, a follow meant you were really going to see this person's stuff. Like, a follow meant follow. And now a follow is like a recommendation, or it's like a guy. It's like, yeah, if you want, show me more of this person, but you're not signed up, Whereas if they sign up for
I think a follow is worse than a like now.
Wow.
It's sad.
Wow.
Because a like should be a like and a follow should be a follow. But now, because a like will help something happen en masse. A like will help other people see it. And a follow doesn't really do anything except maybe stroke the ego. But yeah, a follow doesn't do anything. It's unfortunate, but that's what they've done. And I think it's to the disrespect of really all users. That's why, and I really saw this from the founder of Patreon talked about this at South by Southwest. He has a talk on YouTube. You should check it out. Your listeners should check it out. Just his most recent South by Southwest keynote.
Who was it? What was the name again?
Jack Conte. He's the founder of Patreon. So he built up his creator business as a musician on YouTube. So YouTube is I think one of the best platforms out there, and definitely a place I'm trying to get onto where they are still respecting the subscribe. And that's why it's one of the best creator platforms. I mean, it's a platform that launched Mr. Beast and all these other creators. And it's really been a long time since you've heard of a huge creator coming off of something like Instagram. For me, like something like TikTok it's just very fractionalized attention, where YouTube, you could have shorts and you could have long form. YouTube is just having, like a television channel. You could have hours of content. People really get sucked into your ecosystem. So I'm looking to move more in that direction, like in attention supportive environments instead of attention deficit environments, which TikTok and Instagram really have become these days. After scrolling on your phone for a few minutes, looking at real, you don't feel good. It's the equivalent of like information, entertainment, junk food. It just hits all the dopamine receptors. But tell me, what did you actually see? What were the reels you actually looked at? Did that affect you? Did anything come of that? It's mostly just wasted time.
I couldn't agree more. And I've always been a huge fan of YouTube because even though, yes, they do a little bit of the algorithm stuff, like, yes, if you were to watch YouTube shorts, it would probably be a similar experience. But YouTube as a whole has always had an educational tilt to it. And like, if I look back on my life of how many hours spent on YouTube, I really don't regret it because it's like YouTube is like my third school. Like, I went to like undergrad, I went to law school, and I never learned so many things like, about marketing or about business or just other random like law stuff. Like, I really came up on YouTube. And they're the originals for that reason. And they don't want to change, I don't think, too much because they have that credibility of like normal people will go to YouTube to learn something that is not complete like nonsense. Like, you could find a nice like hour-long, documentary or something, or, if you wanted something like more opinionated, there's always like good like video essays on YouTube. And over time, YouTube has gotten better, but to some extent, it's always stayed the same. Like, there's always going to be long form content, and there's always going to be like diverse content that makes sense. So I think YouTube is one of those exceptions to the third party platforms dive. So I love YouTube, but in general, another thing you touched on about the follower counts, especially on those other platforms that don't respect the follow as much, is that there's a big difference between the super fan and the fan. And when you're in business, as opposed to like, say, politics, it's all about the super fans. And I think some people get the wrong idea about business marketing, or at least small business marketing, because they watch how big businesses market and they watch how, say, politicians market. And it's like, I've been watching like the Kamala campaign recently, and I always look at it through the lens of like, she's got to get to 51% of Americans who vote. So the people who like really love it, yes, they can donate money. That's super helpful. They can volunteer. Like, the politicians, they definitely do need the super fans, but they really need the fans. Like, the people got to just go out and vote. And for big business, I think it's very similar to that because you're like Ford Motor Co. There's only so many car companies. You're going to get a lot of purchases from people who aren't super fans. For small businesses, especially if you have IP, or if you're relationship oriented, you make money off the super fans, and it's really all about the super fans. So that's something that I always try to impress upon small business owners, because it's not intuitive, because so much of the marketing world and media is dominated by big companies and by politics, which is fine. But we have to remember most of the economy is actually the small businesses. You just don't hear from them because they're focused on the super fans, and they just don't think you're a super fan.
I mean, that's basically it, And I'll say, just one note on what we're seeing in politics right now, and our politics are really, really influenced by social media. Like, these days, there's two things that are going on in the election, right? And only one of them is going to matter for the outcome. So there is this small section of the country where people live in these swing states where their votes really matter. There's, very small people there. And then everyone else's vote is a culture war vote. We live in New York. We know which way it's going to go no matter how we vote. We're just voting for yes, this, and the culture war that. Now, these two things are related, but really it's only if the, politicians could convince enough of the people whose votes really matter, and everyone else, we're just referring. So yes, the politicians need the super fans for money, but then they need the regular people to get over the hump. And I think businesses are actually, these bigger businesses are starting to see that they have super fans too, and that they need to cater to them in a different way. and it's to their benefit. So in that way, bigger businesses are starting to act like some of these successful smaller businesses. And I just think more smaller businesses who are very, very small or not very distinguished need to become a lot more distinguished and a lot more dynamic, which, and it's hard. It's always going to be hard to run a small business. And I think that right now, small businesses, we're asking more of them than ever before. I mean, we're each, small creators, law practitioners in the comics, and, we're basically running media companies on top of what our core, craft and occupation and product lines are. And that's just what everyone's being asked to do.
That is, you're right. That's literally an unavoidable part of the job if you're like someone new. And like, I look at my industry and like the only people who like aren't like that are people who have pedigree, who like have been around or something, or, they have to have a good reason. Like they need to be out and about a lot or something like that. But the default is you have to be, everyone's a media company. And to make matters worse, not only do you have to be a media company, and this is for people who are like in professional services who wouldn't otherwise be a media company, you have to compete against influencer people who are also your profession. So like you might be a dentist and you're like, I know the teeth really well. Like I went to a really serious dental school, and you're like, who are all these dentist influencers who are just dominating me on social media and SEO in my area? Nobody cares. I went to NYU dental school. So you almost feel like there's you have to be playing in that world because you don't want to be taken down by the influencer professionals.
I think you just got to start, because there's always going to be someone ahead of you. There's always going to be someone behind you. In most cases, the people that are ahead of you, if they see you're working hard and you ask them questions, they'll help you. And then, but and I understand the challenges. Like it's hard to get content together, to film video, but at the end of the day, you just have to do it. It's like going to the gym. You're not going to be, lifting, 3 plates on the first day, but the fact that you showed up, that's a step in the right direction. I think that's just what it is. And a lot of this stuff, it does build up over time, and less people are seeing content than ever before. But back in the day, before streaming, cable television, you couldn't watch the show whenever you wanted, and you had to catch it when you caught it, and eventually you caught up to it. And that's kind of how it is with our content, except people can save content and watch it later. I bookmark stuff all the time, but we're all just kind of trying and try to get over the hump, but we have to market relentless. I mean, the number of my fans who are, the super fans who are really good fans, oftentimes they don't know what I'm up to because I just haven't created enough content and they haven't caught it, and they would have loved to support or know about it, but there just wasn't enough content to get to that person in time. And to some degree, that leads back to my anger at the platforms because, I'm really just one guy, I have a small team, but it really is just me, getting the marketing out there right now. And it's not easy. I imagine many other small creators and small businesses feel the same pain. At the end of the day, you just have to take matters into your own hands and keep going.
I think you made a really useful point about the super fans, that anyone who's lucky enough to have super fans who always want to consume your stuff, keep them well fed. Why let them go hungry if you're lucky enough to have them? You might as well keep it going, and it doesn't matter if if you're not winning 100 million regular fans. But I want to ask one last big question. What's your vision for Goofy Froot, and what's your ideal outcome if you could grow in all the ways that you want to grow?
I think ideally, and this has really changed a lot over the last couple of years. Like even in the beginning, we kind of saw taking these comics, eventually turning them into an animation, and getting a deal. We're very like Adult Swim kind of energy. So initially we're like, okay, we'd love to pitch this to Adult Swim, and now Adult Swim, I don't even know if they still technically exist. And then I was like, okay, it would be really great to have like a Netflix show. And now I'm at the point where I just want to have the fan base where I could produce whatever I want, whether that's comics, animations, products, whatever form they may take. I just want to be able to produce them and profitably distribute them. So if I want to create more animations, then those will probably be on YouTube or my own platform. So it's just shifted from wanting to have a deal and have someone third party put us on to no, we don't need any of that. We just need to be dynamic and build the audience and grow with them. And over the last couple of years, I've really seen that the future is creator owned and is having your own platform and that direct relationship with the audience. And you see that happening across. You see that a lot in music right now. We've seen it in stand-up comedy. I think we're going to, it's existed for a while in comics with Kickstarter. And I think that's just kind of growing to, hitting this parity point with publisher comics and then, self-produced comics. They're kind of going to be parody, and then creator like fully produce on your own is going to take the lead and really become dominant over the next couple of years. So that's where I'm looking to take things.
That sounds great. I actually have one more question I really want to ask.
Sure.
What does your like trademark portfolio look like? And what role does that play in your business, if at all?
Trademark in terms of our trademarked IP?
Yeah, like is that like a type of IP that you make usage of, or do you just rely on copyright?
Well, generally, I mean, for us, we have our logo is trademarked, so that protects the brand, continues to enhance the brand. Go into some additional categories with it. A lot of all the characters, copyright, the content. Now, I think what's interesting of our brand is I think we would have the ability to trademark more characters, because we do use characters, as like, subsidiary logos in different parts of the marketing. So I think that would, you would know best. That would make sense, that if that's how you're using a character, then they could be trademarked as well. And the fact that we're using different characters in that sense in different, areas, like we have Chill Pepper on our rolling papers, and then we're going to have more products that we're going to have Boss Banana on, and not just characters as part of the design of the product, but in the branding of the marketing of the product. So in that sense, that remains open for us.
Got it. I just wanted to ask about that, just to let remind everyone that when it comes to the trademarks, it's not just like the brand name. There can be logos and slogans and things like that. And for every category of goods that you're using the trademark, that could be a whole nother registration right there. And, in today's age, there's so many companies and there's so much IP, there's more infringement than ever, and so many people end up, having to take others down. But you've never had like a copycat or anything, have you?
I think once someone tried to take some of our content and put it on their own Instagram, and then we had to go for that takedown request with Instagram, which that was a very weird process, I'll say, where I think we had to let the other person know of our address at that point. It felt like we were doxing ourselves to the person that just stole our IP. It was very weird. We were successfully able to get that taken down. It's not an easy process. And I think that in this world of, generative AI and everything that's going on right now, where it's very hard to protect your IP as an artist, I think that these platforms need to be doing a lot better to individual creators protect their IP.
I agree. A lot of people have a really hard time using the platforms to get these blatant infringements taken down. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike. Wish you all the best with Goofy Froot. How can people find you? I assume you just want to give the website, not the third party. But tell people everything you want.
Go to my website or go to my Instagram. It's goofyfroot.com, goofyfroot on Instagram, and that's spelled GOOFYFROOT. So fruit like Fruit Loops, Goofy Froot. And find me there. It's okay to find me on Instagram. I'm not leaving. I'm going to be there. Just when you come to my Instagram page, click the link to my website and sign up to my email list, and send me a DM and say hi.
I love it. All right. Thanks, Mike. Talk soon. Enjoy, everyone.